Rotterdam was the turnaround point on my 38-day round-trip cruise from Boston, and the red line shows the route I followed in part 1 of this series. Now in part 2 I'll follow the blue line, and we stopped in all different ports on the way back to Boston. Again, all of the ports had some historical link to the Vikings and the sea routes they traveled. My ship spent 2 days in Rotterdam, and the first morning I took a narrated harbor tour. Rotterdam is the largest port in Europe with an incredible amount of shipping activity. The tour boat leaves right across the Swan Bridge from the cruise terminal, an easy scenic walk. I took the first cruise in the morning, and it wasn't very crowded, but they were lined up waiting for the next cruise when we got back to the dock. I bought a combo ticket for both the harbor tour and the Maritime Museum. It was a short walk along a canal from the tour dock to the museum, where I had a nice lunch at Restaurant Lloyd's and then spent a couple of hours inside the museum. An exhibit called the Offshore Experience was especially entertaining. There's an open outdoor air portion of the museum with interesting boats on exhibit. My second morning in Rotterdam, I walked by the original headquarters of Holland America Line, founded in 1873. It's now the Hotel New York. Continuing over a short pedestrian bridge, it's a pleasant 20-minute walk to the SS Rotterdam, the fifth Holland America ship with that name. The SS Rotterdam was launched in 1958, retired in 2000, and opened as a combination museum and hotel in 2010. I really enjoyed the museum tour. The first part was a guided small group tour of the engine rooms. I was fortunate that our guide served as an engineer on the ship when it was originally launched, and he really knew how everything worked. The second part of the tour was a do-it-yourself walk through the rest of the ship, and the little audio units with headphones were great. You can walk through the officers' quarters, and there were volunteers in the bridge to explain the navigation and communication systems. I walked back to my ship along the river, stopping at the Phoenix Food Factory for a traditional Dutch sandwich and a beer. The Dutch Pinball Museum was also along that walk, but unfortunately it was closed the day I was there. Then a late afternoon departure with a musical send-off as we sailed away from Rotterdam. We headed through the English Channel, around the Land's End Peninsula, and into the Irish Sea to our next port, Dublin, Ireland, and a very entertaining duck boat ride.
Ah, right.
Anywhere.
Oh, good. He's got to face the right way this time.
All right. That's pretty scary, actually.
Serious.
Yeah, I heard so.
Thank you very much.
Let's see how
we go, so.
I think we should go. Let's go. This is what you've been waiting for. Right.
Then a trip to St. Patrick's Cathedral and the literary parade of Irish writers.
Lacking in confidence. Then we Shaw. We talked a little bit about Shaw the bus already. Pygmalion is his most famous play, which became My Fair Lady. The rain in Spain falls vainly on the plain, etc. He famously trilled Winston Churchill. He sent him a telegram saying, "Dear Mr. Churchill, I'd be delighted if you could come to the opening night of my show. Bring a friend, if you have one." Churchill then responded in kind. He said, "Dear Mr. Shaw, thank you very much indeed for your kind invitation. Unfortunately, I have a prior engagement on the evening in question. However, I'd happily come to your second night, if you have one."
A must-do for me was the Guinness Storehouse tour, including a pint in the 360-degree rooftop bar. The next port was Liverpool, England, where I really enjoyed an all-day tour of northern Wales. A ride on the Llangollen Railway was a high point of the day. There's a separate 3-minute video of that ride in the train section of my YouTube channel, and a link at the end of this video. This tour also went to Chirk Castle, which was built in 1295. The castle is now owned by the National Trust and is beautifully maintained. Amazing that it's 725 years old. As we were leaving Liverpool, I was surprised to see so many motorcycles lined up to board a nearby ferry boat. I was soon to learn why. At our next port on the Isle of Man, I took a rail tour that began on the Manx Electric Railway and then continued on the Snaefell Mountain Railway. There's a separate 4-minute video of those rail trips in the train section of my YouTube channel and a link at the end of this video. Now about all those motorcycles in Liverpool. Turns out they were boarding a ferry to the Isle of Man for the annual Classic TT motorcycle race, held in August and featuring classic and exotic motorcycles from around the world. Our tour guide gave an enthusiastic description of the August Classic TT race as opposed to the regular TT race that's usually held in June.
Right, this is where it's all happening. And if you look at the registration numbers, they're coming from everywhere. It's not just over here, if you're interested in bike racing at all. He's a hero here on the island. He's from New Zealand and he comes over at least twice a year. He participates in the TT. The main TT, which is at the end of May and early June, and he also participates in the Classic Grand Prix. If you look, there's the old bikes, aren't they fantastic? This is the ones where you could take it apart and you can still do things with it. Just over there. Whereby, if you buy modern bikes, it's just a big plastic cover, isn't it? You can't do anything with it anymore. And it's just the smell of these old bikes, and then you've got the oil leaking, and you've got the old leathers, and you've got some of the visitors. They're a lot older than them old bikes, and then they've got their leathers, and it's fantastic. I absolutely love it.
What does TT stand for again?
Tourist Trophy. Tourist Trophy.
After a day on the Isle of Skye and a day at sea, we spent 3 days exploring northern Iceland, crossing the Arctic Circle in the process. A highlight of this part of the trip was a tour of the Turf House Museum just outside of Akureyri. Ísafjörður was my favorite stop along northern Iceland. I went on a walking tour of the town with an excellent guide, and the Maritime History Museum across from the cruise dock was very interesting. The Turahusov restaurant, located right next door to the museum, opened at noon for lunch, and it was outstanding. Lunch was the meal when I usually ate off the ship to sample local cuisine. I highly recommend this restaurant with its communal seating and fresh-cooked seafood. From Iceland, we sailed to Greenland, and enough ice had cleared so we could go all the way through Prince Christian Sound. How did an island that's 80% ice sheet get named Greenland? According to Viking sagas, Eric the Red was exiled from Iceland for murder, and he sailed west until he reached land and settled. After his 3-year exile ended, Eric returned to Iceland to recruit people to come to his new settlement. According to Norse legend, he called it Greenland in hopes of enticing people to go there. In Prince Christian Sound, the only sign of human settlement was the tiny Inuit village of Apillitak, with about 100 residents who survive by hunting and fishing. They're very isolated, especially when icebound in the winter, and an occasional cargo helicopter is their only supply from the outside world. It was hard to imagine that lifestyle. After a day in Nanitalik, Greenland, I sailed to St. Anthony, Newfoundland, and went to Lanso Meadows National Historic Site. This was an incredible archaeological site with the excavated remains of a complete 11th century Viking settlement. It's the earliest evidence of European settlement in North America. Some theories suggest that Leif Erikson discovered this site. He was the son of Eric the Red, who settled Greenland. There's certainly lots of great Viking history in this part of the world. In addition to the excavation sites, there were excellent recreations of how the village may have looked. Next, a day in St. John's, Newfoundland, the capital of the province, where we were welcomed by traditional music and the furry island namesake. Hey people, come on, more petting. Here I am.
Her name's Odessa. She's 6. Is you a good girl? Yes, you're a good girl. It's the lover drool and all. Oh yes, got to have the drool time.
Well, in St. John's I went to Cape Spear, where the main highlight was just that I could say to myself that I'd been to the most easterly point in North America. On the other hand, I really enjoyed a trip to Signal Hill with excellent views of the St. John's Harbor all the way out to Cape Spear. In December 1901, the first transatlantic wireless transmission was received on Signal Hill by Guglielmo Marconi. It was sent in Morse code from Cornwall, England. There was a beautiful evening sail away from St. John's through the narrow opening to the harbor. But the weather changed the next day, and the captain had to cancel our port call in Halifax, Nova Scotia because of high winds. That was a small price to pay for mostly great weather and no other missed ports for 38 days on this Voyage of the Vikings cruise. This cruise had a fantastic itinerary. 38 days was a nice length for a retiree like me. No ports were repeated during the entire cruise. I could stay on the same ship in the same room and not have to move my stuff. And the best part for me was that the cruise began and ended in the U.S., so no air travel was required. Just a train, bus, or car would do, unless you really wanted to go on one of those airplanes. I hope some cruise lines keep itineraries like that on their schedules.